Today we are talking about AV for particular industries. So each industry that KONTEK serves has its own unique challenges and constraints, but also unique dreams and solutions to those constraints and challenges. So Marques, if you're talking to a healthcare leader who wants to build an AV space, what is a common dream that you hear about? A common constraint or challenge that they should think about ahead of time, and some ways that maybe you've resolved that in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most common things, because again, we stay out of the clinical spaces, so we think about the non-procedural spaces that are in healthcare. Number one constraint is flexibility and use. So you need to be flexible, but also have a standard. What happens is there may be doctors, nurses, clinical physicians, clinical engineers, and they actually go between hospitals. So one of the biggest constraints, how do you work with independent systems to create a system that will make sense and kind of mirror another system? So there's competition between the systems. So, healthcare system A does not want to say, you know what, we have the exact same thing healthcare B does. It doesn't help them in the business of healthcare. But what you do see is when there's a doctor that serves both entities, okay, well, I'm coming to give a speech now in healthcare system B site. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to connect. This is all foreign. And so there's so many interconnection points in healthcare now, especially in our state, North Carolina, where, so many folks have been purchased and merged and everything else that we do share so much of this. So we'll look at it and to solve it, we say, okay, where can we make commonalities? If I'm going to do a web conference, some of this is going to be the same no matter what, just about. But how can we make the graphical user interface, the GUI, how can we make that similar but not identical? How can we make sure that we're paying attention to, the overall system design in one space? So if we know someone else has a similar auditorium coming up, we can say, okay, here's the design we did here. There's overlap in these organizations. We know that they have doctors that go back and forth. Let's use this as our base design. And so a lot of it becomes, how do you reference another design? So you still want to give them some individuality, some of that branding that's specific to that system, but make the overall experience be almost universal so that if a doctor goes from one site to the next, they just jump in, they can present, they're very comfortable. You don't want to waste 15 minutes of a meeting with folks trying to figure out the AV. That's one of the worst things you can have happen. The best AV system is the one no one notices. They didn't need a technician to help them. They just patched in and they got to work.
I love that. Okay. So for them, help them focus on their job between different sites. And so you're saying flexibility of use, but creating at least a standard enough that they can get in, do their job quickly, keep taking care of the patient, keep taking care of their team, and just move on.
Exactly.
That's the main thing for them. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. I want to circle back to this, but I kind of want to hit at least all the industries so we can keep moving. Next one, academia. You're a dean at a university. You've got a major project, an auditorium, something like that. What are some common dreams, constraints, and solutions that you hear in that environment?
Yeah, so this one can get deep really, really fast. So the pedagogy has changed so much over the years, right? Mm-hmm. If we think about our time in school, our time now, and the changes that have happened, well, these are all students. And again, these are competitive enterprises, right? Colleges are trying to recruit kids, bring more and more kids in. Well, how do you reach a 19-year-old today, an 18-year-old? How do you teach them in ways that make sense? Hey, there are teachers on TikTok. There are universities that are launching things like on TikTok and YouTube. And, we always joke about YouTube University, but more and more higher ed spaces will put things out like that because that's the biggest challenge. As the learning style changes for kids, what deans and professors are seeing now is nothing like what they were seeing 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Kids nowadays come in, they're used to, I can be remote, I can swipe, I can have it on my phone, my tablet, I can learn anywhere. And so how do you now take your university? And, COVID really hammered this point home for a lot of people. If you did not already have a remote learning plan, you had to get one really fast. Yep. But from there, also, you think about physical constraints. the campus is only so large in most cases. Unless you're building up, you're not going to always be able to build out. So how do you get, more students in more seats? Well, guess what? You do it virtually. Okay, well, now how do I make sure I have a really seamless experience, whether you're using Teams, Zoom, Blue Jeans, whatever you're using doesn't even matter. It's how are you capturing all of this? And then, with the rise of HyFlex, which is probably around 2015 or so, it really started taking off, hybrid flexible learning. So that means you can be synchronous, asynchronous, in-person, or remote, and you have all those options, right? So it's how do you build a classroom so a professor can still teach, still reach the students, they can be engaged, they can interact, they can do all these things, and it makes sense, right? It works in a way, it's got to be seamless for the instructor, right? They've got to be able to come in, drop in their laptop, or just start typing on a keyboard, but I can zoom and I can see a person on a display and say, okay, I can see their facial expression, their understanding, or, oh, wait, this person in the gallery, they look like they're confused. Are there questions? Do I need to recover, go over a point again, or what needs to happen here? So I'd say that's one of the biggest, constraints you have is with the teaching changing. And that's where instructional designers are really, really important, and have them working with your AV team, your technology teams, to make sure you understand how are you going to teach in the space. Now, how do you serve the in-person folks, the remote folks? How do you capture it so I can watch it, on demand? And for us, that's what it really came down to, is designing systems throughout the years that just kept expanding, kept having more and more capability to capture all these things. And then you go from there.
That's interesting. I did my MBA. It was a hybrid MBA. So I started some of my core classes, your financial accounting, was pre-recorded videos that I would watch asynchronously and then interact with a professor through a portal or via email. And then I did a hybrid approach where more advanced finance classes would be like online with a live, synchronous instructor. But in this one, he was at home on Zoom or some kind of equivalent. And then I had in-person classes that did not have any video online component at all. And then also in-person classes where there were people at home on a Zoom equivalent, and we had the in-person. And it was so difficult to have the person at home speak and not interrupt people in the classroom, and vice versa. Because if you're at home, sometimes you can't hear a student at all, and the professor doesn't recap the question. And so they're just moving on. You have no idea what anybody just said.
Yeah.
So it's a really, really difficult challenge.
That is something we see, currently. And for us, what we started doing is we incorporate, more microphones, right? And different types of microphones, because we have these huge auditoriums, especially, are difficult. You nailed it. If someone in the class is saying something, if I'm remote, I have no idea what just happened. So I'm immediately disengaged from the class because I don't know what's happening. So that's when you get into more of these systems. And we've done some, it's not to be too technical with it, but you'll take your microphones and integrate them in a way so they can automatically switch cameras. So now if I have a student in the back row speaking, not only will a microphone pick them up, but another camera will now switch and have them on the video. So that way, if I'm watching, I can see the person, I can hear the person, and I feel more in tune with what's happening in the class.
That would have been amazing as a student. Amazing to have that. I know it's very, very complex. We talked in the last episode about PAGNAC. Did I get that right? Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, okay. It's very complex, but the experience as a student would have been incredible.
Right, right. Because, and as things get, better and better on the technology side, you can really drive down latency, jitter. Those are the things that really make a online, session just terrible.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
So they have to all work together, right? So your network has to be working. You have to then design your AV network to make sure you're keeping those things down. You don't want to introduce devices that are going to increase that latency, because everyone's been on the call where you think someone finished, so you start, but wait, they're not quite finished, and you're kind of going back and forth, and all of that distracts from the experience.
Yes, especially if you're talking to me, because I'm one of those that I try to not finish the sentence, but I'm like an active conversational partner. I'm the worst when there's slow internet. Anyway, okay. Cool. Okay, so I love that. So what would you, maybe to be more pointed, because I love this topic just because I've been in school for my whole life. But what are some things that you wish, let's say a dean of a university thinking about a project like this, what do you wish they would know ahead of time? We've talked before, like hey, bring us in as early as possible. When you have that dream in the shower, we want to be there the next day. That kind of idea. What else would you want them to know about some of these constraints that you face and some of the solutions that you've put in place before?
I say realistically, also take a holistic view of the student experience, right? Because you don't just have one type of student anymore. You have all these types of students. So when you're thinking about your spaces, how do you serve every student that you may encounter? And we think about, we went over the big components of HyFlex, but the other thing to think about is also diversity and inclusion for others that may have physical differences, may have learning differences. We think about it with ADA and ramps, things like that, but are you thinking about it also with the size of your display? Or do you have listen assist systems? How are you as inclusive as possible? Because at the end of the day, students are paying money to go to college and all these other things, or even in K through 12 environment, I'm trying to come, I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to be engaged. So really take a holistic view of how do I serve all of the students and start there.
Interesting. My professor in my accounting class had a very poor mic. I could not hear him very well. My accounting skills are terrible because I have an auditory processing issue I was diagnosed with when I was younger, which is funny now because I'm on a podcast with you.
Right.
But having really high quality, good audio actually probably would have helped my accounting skills. They're terrible now because I feel like I just didn't learn it very well. Yeah,
you were 100% correct, though, right? If they had a listen assist, and nowadays they're getting more advanced, you can do it over Bluetooth. But if you could just have AirPods in and be picking up, the microphone more clearly directly in your ears, how much would that have helped you focus? Or if you have displays that are undersized, which is actually common, we see this a lot. I can't engage in the class, right? If I can't read the spreadsheet on the screen, then am I just sitting here kind of coasting through and I don't really understand what's happening? I am not going to be as engaged in the conversation and the learning process.
Been there. Yep. Been there. Literally, especially for a spreadsheet, because the numbers are tiny and you got to see the whole model and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many times I just couldn't see. Yeah. I couldn't.
And it's really,
I couldn't see what they were talking about. Yeah.
We talked about it before. It's just math, right? At the end of the day, it's not you need a bigger display because I said so. It's because math said so. Math said you need this size display. And some of that also, realistically gets into budgetary issues because we see all the time when folks will say, oh, no, we totally don't need that 98-inch display. That's just too big. It's too much. No, it's not. You're sitting 35 feet away. I promise you, if you use something smaller, and even that's undersized for this example, but if you use something smaller, no one can read it. So what are we doing? If you're in a classroom, I'm sitting here and I can't really take notes. I can't really, or does everyone try to push forward? What is happening to actually accomplish the goal of learning?
That would be a really interesting discovery process. It's like, okay, you go sit in this auditorium, you sit in the back row, and I'm going to show you a spreadsheet and see what you can, how that experience is for you. And it'll be like, interesting. Yeah.
And again, there's more than one way to tackle it, because you do larger displays. Absolutely. But again, that's where streaming and all these new technologies come in handy because kids can kind of come in with their laptops, with their tablets, and they could actually join a remote session and see it up close and personal right there on their device. So if you're incorporating all that into the classroom, again, it gets back to what's the holistic view of how do I serve all the students?
I love that. So we have the patient experience, say, and then the student experience, like thinking about these things in these different industries, what that means for you, what that implications are, what that entails in the dream, and then the solution. Interesting. Okay. Next one, I want to talk about a corporate environment, so an enterprise environment, thinking about their AV solutions. We've talked about this a lot. We talked in the last episode about coming into a glass boardroom and and Marques starts sweating, as you enter that room. But what are some other things common dreams, common constraints, and common solutions that you think about in that environment?
What we see in the enterprise space, first and foremost, people want technology that their employees are going to use. There's nothing more frustrating that I hear from, CTOs and CIOs is, hey, we spent all this money on this room. No one uses this. Either they don't know how, it doesn't work correctly, something going on with it, and we feel like we just wasted our money. So that's number one. Yeah. Number one biggest constraint, did you make decisions on the type of equipment? Is it solid? Is it robust? Will it do what you've asked? Is the design something that actually worked for the workflow of your users, right? Did you actually sit down and bring folks to the table that do this work every day and How do you present? How do you connect? So it's the actual using of the space. But the other thing that creeps into this, security. IT and security. Nowadays, with what's happening in the world and breaches and all these things, a lot of times the number one attack vector is the person, right? People will fall for social engineering so quickly. Oh, wait, I just found a flash drive. Is this free? Can I have it? Let me pop it in my computer. Like, no, don't do that. But it happens. It happens. Or, oh, wait, I saw a really cool cat video. I want to play this. Okay, so next thing you know, you're down in the weeds and something's happening. Well, okay, how do you secure your AV system to make sure we're not an attack vector? Like, we want to reduce our attack footprint as much as possible, follow good security protocols, be a partner to IT, not an adversary, to make sure we're all on the same page about what can happen and what can't. Because, another constraint in the corporate space, people do things at home. They think, hey, at home, I've got Apple TV, I've got my iPhone, I just cast right to the TV. I want to do that at work. Like, we can do something similar, but we can't just make it that simple because, again, you have to have a secure environment. So how do you enable wireless sharing in a corporate space and keep it secure so that you don't have any breach due to the technology you're implementing? That's huge. And for us, it's all about early conversations. Let's talk to IT. What are the rules? What are the benefits to something we're introducing? What do you need from us? You need to understand the protocols that are at play. Do you need to understand the ports that need to be opened up? Or maybe we're going to completely split the networks apart and say, okay, we'll have a dedicated AV network. We'll have a dedicated, LAN for clients. They'll never touch. We'll do it through basically segregation. There's all kinds of ways to tackle that. But in addition to being able to use things correctly, it's also, are they secure? It's never been as important as it is right now because the rate of breaches and incidents, and heck, we've gone through it. We've had one. So that stuff, it only gets more and more amplified. Everyone wants convenience. They want online services. They want all these things. And there's a saying that you can have convenience or you can have security. You cannot have both.
I like that. Yeah, because I am one of those employees that you would chastise because I want to just, I'm on an iPad or my computer or my phone. I just want to show you this thing real quick that I'm talking about. Let me just stream it. Why can't I do that? Because I've got an Apple TV at home and I want to just punch in a little code. Boom, it's there. What's wrong with that?
It's like, hey, folks, how you do your home networking, it's completely up to you. When I am responsible for $1 million company or $1 billion company and we have these networks and all these things that need to remain private, it's like, absolutely not. I'm not letting you come in here with your personal phone and just throw it on my network and my display. And again, as you get into, advanced environments, that's really how it's set up. Everything is segregated. You might have a personal device that's allowed to use the guest network. Well, if you try to go from the guest network to your internal display, in many cases, it's not going to work. Can it be done? Oh, absolutely. But again, it's not as simple as, well, I do it all the time at home. Well, hey, we have a secure environment. We have to allow things to talk a very specific way, allow networks to communicate in a very specific way. That's something where you just have to, be a partner to IT at all times.
Okay. That's more complicated than I thought.
Yeah, much more. Much more.
The other thing I want to get your take on is, when I worked at an organization one time, we had a couple of boardrooms, and like you're saying, the boardrooms went unused because it was easier to sit at our desks and have a virtual session, even though we were just in the same building, than it was to go get in the boardroom together and talk to one of our, team members that was at home or on the other side of the country. And so, because every time we went into this boardroom, we would go, where's that dongle? And then we would all leave. Somebody would leave the boardroom, go to the utility closet in a cardboard box that was at the bottom with like 50 different cables in it. Some HDMI, RGB with, this and that. And some was USB-C and, yada, yada, yada. Is it, and these are smaller, simpler setups than what you guys install, but is it something like that where people kind of get into like, I don't even know how to use this thing. I'm intimidated. I don't know where the cable is, that kind of thing.
Exactly what and once they have a bad experience, oh man, you've got to work 3 times as hard to get them back on board with the room. Yeah. So on the bright side, I give credit to a lot of these manufacturers, between Zoom, Google Meet, Teams. I try to be as technology agnostic as possible. We support it all. But simple things, right, that we take for granted almost. If you do what's called a MTR, Microsoft Teams room, we'll talk about them in a future episode. But what they enable you to do is one-touch join. And it's not just them. Other folks have this too. But that has really changed the experience for a lot of people. I can come in with nothing but my phone. I've already sent the meeting to the room. I just hit join session. I don't have to do anything else. Everything turns on. The display is on. The microphones are dialed in. I can hear. I don't need to do anything else. If I want to present, say I have a whole group of us in the room. Ooh, I can do the same thing. Guess what? I can join the meeting from my laptop. I can now share directly into the room. It'll show up on the screen. I'm done.
Do you have one for TikTok?
I probably need one, man. It's probably needed.
Okay. Okay. That's helpful. I am not a Teams person, but I understand just being able to like hit a button. That sounds great.
Yeah. And all the major players, like I said, Google Meet. I know it's a big one. WebEx has them, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and they're making, I'd say the progress in the last year or two has been at an astronomical pace compared to what it was for almost, 15 years. 15 years of joining, meetings in a specific way. But again, I think COVID really lit a fire under a lot of people to really say like, okay, we're going to have to be remote. How do you make it better? Okay, now you have return to office. Well, what do we do now to get people back in the office and using these spaces? But we see it really accelerating as far as, how the devices are being connected, how they're trying to be as simple as possible to use. In the integration side, especially as far as, you get this one kit and it can do all these things. Now you just connect your other devices, and the experience on the user side is the main thing. So if you can come into a room and there are no cables, right? There's just a controller on the table, maybe. You just push the button. That's it. Yeah, you start.
That'd be great.
You're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I love that. Okay. So last one is government entities, organizations, institutions. What is that experience like with the dreams that you find in that industry or that vertical? What are the constraints that you see? And then how do you guys kind of work around this for some solutions?
Yeah, and government can be a little trickier too, because you have some spaces go from your extremely mission critical. We support 911 call centers, things of that nature. Do you have, people take for granted they just have regular basic administrative meeting spaces where basic meetings. So there's a wide range and gap in there. But what we typically see is, is it robust? Is it stable? Especially when you're dealing with your mission critical spots. Like they can't have downtime. So, is all the equipment being specified, designed to run 24/7? Can we trust this? Because again, if you're monitoring weather in a command and control station, you can't have a display just randomly failing and all of a sudden you can't monitor what's going on across the county, across the city, what have you. So in those types of things for municipalities and government, mission critical hardware everyone can trust, and then designs that will support that. How they work it's not as flexible because you have shifts that rotate and things like that. So they just need one standard and everything's connected for the most part. But that's what we see the most. And it's got to last, right? It's, a lot of these are funded by taxpayers. So you can't think you're going to just come in and every, 2 to 3 years do a refresh. Sometimes you're extending, 5 to 7 years. We actually have a system in place. I think it's in like year 12, which is still amazing because you don't expect that. And disclaimer, no one should, right? It's just like any other computer. You shouldn't expect it to last 12 years. But,
yes,
with heavy usage, you have to make sure it will stay up and running. Because again, some of these spaces that we support, you can't have them go down. And also from a design standpoint, you have to really designate what is critical, right? And I say this because I was talking to one of our clients, and we're talking about a courthouse. And power had gone out, something had happened, and there's something called DSP, digital signal processor, computer for audio. And what I noticed is they didn't have a battery backup. I said, hey, would you say that, the courtroom is pretty critical? If a courtroom goes down, trying to move cases, that is not easy. There's a lot going on with that. And they said, yeah, definitely critical. I said, well, you should be having a UPS in here then. I said, anything that we deem is critical, because we do it all the time for command and control. It's just a basic design element. We're always putting in a UPS. I say, well, for your courtrooms, put in a UPS. Any space that you deem to be critical, you put it on a battery backup. And again, you're not going to, if the power goes out, it may not run for 5 hours, but that's not the goal. The goal is, can we protect against brownouts, power spikes, blips in the power, quick drops, things like that? Because again, these are all essentially desktop computers. And, if you wouldn't just go home, if you still have a desktop computer, you wouldn't just snatch the plug out of the wall. Same concept. We don't want these things just losing power. So how do you make sure that we do our part, to make sure it stays as bulletproof as possible when it comes to the usage of the system and getting the value out of the lifetime.
Yeah, that's a very simple ROI calculation on that. A battery backup versus the time and energy and money required for scheduling cases, reducing your throughput, and just being that'd be a whole mess. Yeah, that makes sense. When you were talking about the kind of like the weather system, I'm thinking of I had this image of a couple of years ago when we had that ice storm in Texas. There was an ERCOT was like the energy control room for the Texas grid, and I saw a picture of it, and it was like a bunch of people in a room that just had these huge monitors and things just like measuring all this stuff. And I thought, what a cool job. You're like in a headquarters of like mission control, what a cool. Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about with all these kind of like monitors and dashboards and all that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, you nailed it. It's that's exactly what it is. You'll have workstations at any point in time. Someone can take what they're doing on the workstation, throw it to a monitor. If there's an emergency, announcement, something's going on in a specific area, that can be brought up and take over, half of the display while you're still monitoring on the other half. So you need this flexibility in what you're throwing on the screen, but you have so many screens that you have to have access to, because again, during an emergency event, man, there are so many things being monitored in real time. There's all these inputs from all these different sources, and people have to track them.
Yeah, that's cool. It's a bit of a selfish question. I just think those setups are so incredible. So
they're cool, and it's it's not the same. It's not mission critical. But if you go to Vegas or you go to any kind of casino, you see a similar deployment when you see these giant, because to them, gambling is important. This is mission critical, right? You want the people to be engaged and locked in. You go to a sports bar, right? You want people to spend money and to stay there. Same kind of concept.
I love desk setups, and that is like on steroids. Those kind of things are amazing. Yeah, cool. Okay, so what I'm hearing to wrap up is when you're thinking about these dreams, these constraints, and the solutions around those kind of constraints or challenges, the patient experience within healthcare is a critical point to be thinking about, and all the implications of how you have defined that as a hospital system or outpatient services. Like, what is that care pathway, and what are all the AV connecting points, the decision points that you need to have as part of your AV setup?
Right. And I'll say not just the patient experience, but the experience of the user system, right? So your nurse practitioners, clinical engineer folks, things like that may be running a case or doing something or just having meetings for learning.
Yeah, okay. That's the next step of the patient experience. Yeah, that's where I was getting at. Great. And then, so similarly, the student experience, which is impacted by the users, which would be the professors, but also the students in an academic environment, and all the implications there of how those classes are put together. Instructional designers being a huge asset in that constraint. And then the corporate environment, you have the employee experience and what that looks like. And if people feel confident and excited to use the AV setup, but a huge component around security. What does that look like? What does that mean for your network and all of that? And then last, in the government space, what's critical, and then what is kind of normal operations, and then thinking through stability and longevity in the systems. That kind of captured in the mix of those industries. Those are the things that are really, really crucial that you guys think about, and that buyers, thinking about dreaming in this kind of setup, that they should be thinking about.
I say, yeah. And there's an underlying current there that as you read them back, it all points back to your user, right? What does your user need? Whoever your user is, what are their individual needs? And that kind of carries across industries, and you have variability for each type of user in each scenario. That's kind of what it's boiling back to.
Also, who's the user and who's the, call it recipient? I'm thinking like in a courtroom, you've got your plaintiff or defendant. They're not the user of the system. I guess they can be, but they're kind of the recipient of whatever the system is set up. Yeah, okay, interesting.
Your clerk, your courtroom clerk, your judge and your clerk, they got to be happy. Keep them happy.
Yeah.
Make sure they can use the system.
I love that. Okay, any other closing thoughts? That was super, super helpful.
No, it's like I said, it's thinking about a holistic view of your space, your users. How does it all come together? And then I will never get over this one. Early conversation with the right people in the room. So again, everyone should work together, right? AV should work with IT. You should work with your instructional designers and instructional technologists. Make sure everyone's on the same page.
Amen. So to wrap us up, if you are thinking, having a dream about a space that you want an AV setup that would be ideal for you, please get in touch with the KONTEK team. That's KONTEK.com, and the team will take care of you and bring your dream to life. Marques, thank you for walking us through all that complexity and all of your wisdom and expertise in that. And I love hearing from you every week. So we will
Absolutely,
see you next
it's great.
time. Thanks, Marques.